Buonasera e benvenuti. I'm Andrea Bartlett, Director of Events at the National Italian American Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have an exciting event ahead. I'm honored to present to you Paradise Wines, Exploring the Island Wines of Italy with Tony Margotto from Gladiator Wines, brought to you by the National Italian American Foundation. NIAF is a membership-based, nonpartisan, and nonprofit a nonprofit organization founded in 1975. NIAF's mission is to preserve the Italian American heritage, and chat feature at the bottom of your screen. So please remember, you can ask questions, and that's in your chat feature below. I would now like to introduce Tony, our host tonight. Tony roams the less traveled back roads of the Italian countryside in search of quality craft wines. He's the president of Gladiator Wine Distribution, an importer of small artisanal wines handcrafted in Italy. He's the author of Hidden Gems of Italy, winner of the Best European Wine Book in the United States, and the Gourmand International Book Competition. His wines have won numerous awards, including double gold and silver medals at the New York International Wine Competition. His family comes from a small village called Montequilla in the province of Eserna in Molise. And Mr. Margotto has been traveling to Italy for over 20 years, immersing himself in Italian food, wine, and culture. So everyone, please welcome Tony. Tony.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, everyone. Ciao tutti, buonasera. It's nice to see some familiar faces. It's nice to see some new faces as well. Feel free to leave your cameras on. I love to, while you're watching me, I'm watching you, and I see a smile here. I see someone eating. I see someone drinking. I'm happy to see all that. So it keeps me going. So don't be shy. Feel free to start sipping on some wines. Don't wait for me to talk about the wines. Many of you know, who have taken my classes in the past, know that there's a story in a great bottle of wine, and so I'm going to share with you a lot of interesting stories this evening before we specifically talk about the wines. Okay, so just sit back, relax, enjoy the show. If you do have any questions along the way, you can put them in the chat, and I will try to answer them as I go. Let me just make sure that my chat is here. There it is. Okay. And if I don't get to any, if there's any questions that I don't get to, we'll set some time aside at the very end to answer them, okay? And just one quick note about the bottle swap. So originally we have the 4 basic pack of wines. With the bottle swap, for those of you who ordered the 4-bottle pack, we took out the white wine and gave you the Muristello, the special wine. For those of you who ordered an 8-pack or the 12-pack, we just took one of the white wines out, so you have everything, okay? And we're going to talk about all of those wines. So let's begin. So when it comes to choosing a destination for your vacation, we have so many choices at our disposal. If we want to go hiking or go on a ski trip, we might go to the mountains, right? When we think of art, we might want to go to France or Italy, no doubt. When we just want to relax, the beaches come to mind. And for many people, going to an island for vacation sort of represents the ultimate destination for relaxation for many people. The hot sun, the sand, the blue waters. But when you think of an island, typically, one thing that doesn't come to mind is wine. Like, who would go to an island to taste wines? Why go on a wine trip to an island? It's not the first thought. But actually, there are islands in the world, particularly in the Mediterranean, where the story of winemaking seems to go back to the beginning of time. So this evening, we're going to explore 2 of those islands and the paradise wines that come from them, Sicily and Sardinia. So I'm Tony Margiotta, your virtual wine guide for the hour. And before we begin our explorations through the islands of Italy, you might like to know a little bit about me and how I got into wine. So I just want to share a quick story about that, especially for those of you who might be taking my class for the first time. This is a picture of a younger version of me with my father, Elio, who comes from a small village in the Molise region. It's called Montaquilla. Provincia di Sernia. It's about an hour and a half drive from Naples. I spent many summers in this village. And I actually used to, just as a quick side note, I used to just walk out of my uncle's house. There was a little bar like 100 feet away. I'd go there, wait for the bus, and it would take me into the city of Naples. I'd go there for the whole day. And I really only went there for two things. I went there for the pizza, which is sort of obvious, but I also went there for espresso. I'm an espresso addict, and I love good coffee. And Naples really has the best espresso anywhere in Italy, if you ask me. So I literally would take a 2-hour trip just to taste coffee. So anyway, the long story short is Montaquila. I spent all these summers in that village, and I started going there when my grandmother passed away in the year 2000. And I've gone to Italy ever since, every summer. And I really fell in love with the food, the language, the culture. I even got married in Italy, actually on the island of Sardinia, because that's where my wife is from, which is sort of related to what we're talking about tonight. And I had all these food and wine experiences that were so amazing. But every time I'd come home after my trip, I'd run to my local liquor store and buy a bottle of Italian wine. Didn't matter what it was, Sangiovese, Chianti, Nero d'Avola, whatever it was. It almost didn't matter how much I spent. I was always disappointed. The wines were just never quite as good. And initially, it was very perplexing to me why the wines were so different. Everyone had a different theory about it. But what I discovered along my trips, I'd go to different restaurants throughout Italy. I'd always order the house wine. And, more times than not, the house wine tasted better than the bottled Italian wines that I was buying at my local wine shops back in the States. And so I would always ask at the restaurant, who made this wine? It's delicious. And a lot of times they wouldn't even tell me who made the wine. They would just say, oh, a local producer made the wine. And so a lot of times what that turned out to be was artisanal winemakers who were very well known and very well respected in their local towns, but weren't really well known outside of their villages. So this is a picture here of, this is the best way I can illustrate the difference between artisan wine and mass-produced wine, which is predominantly what we find in our local wine shops. I had no idea about this years ago that, there are machines that are doing the harvest, and they're able to make millions of bottles a year. And of course, they're picking the ripe, the rotten, and everything in between, taking it back to the cellar and treating it with, they have access to, in Europe, over 50 different additives. In the United States, there's 70 different additives. So they treat the wine to make it consistently drinkable. That's the only way you can mass produce wine. And that's why just about every wine shop you go into has the exact same wines. There's no surprise there. On the other hand, small artisanal winemakers, they hand harvest and hand select their best grapes at the perfect moment of maturity. You can't make a lot of wine that way. So on average, for me, an artisanal winemaker produces around 50,000 bottles a year or less. That's pretty manageable for a small group of people to do that. On the other hand, to make millions of bottles a year, you need armies of people. And quite honestly, it does take a certain amount of skill to do the harvest. So, and many of the wines that I have found have received international recognitions throughout the world, including two of these wines. And this producer in particular that you're seeing here, Castello Lucignano, we'll be talking about them in a little bit. And also, of course, for those of you who like to read books, my book, Hidden Gems of Italy, talks about, basically, it's a little bit of a crash course in Italian wine, but it also is a little bit of a shopping guide. I teach you how to read Italian wine labels and look for those little hints of quality that you can find on the front and back label sometimes. So here's our program for the evening. I'm going to reveal to you a Sicilian grape that was once found in the great wines of Bordeaux and Barolo. The local people call this wine Veins of Gold, which is a white wine. Kind of gave it away right there. Why a grape from Sicily was named after Calabria. This is very interesting. A Sicilian grape named after Calabria. This creates a lot of tension between the Calabrese and the Siciliani, I'm sure. I'm neither of those, so I'm impartial. And then one red wine, which is an antioxidant elixir, very, very exciting. And then I'm going to share with you 4 wine and food pairing ideas that taste like paradise. I actually emailed those to you, and we'll do a little Q&A at the end if we have some time. Okay, just a refresher of the regions of Italy. Italy's broken down by 20 regions. 2 of its regions happen to be large islands. One is Sardinia, and the other is Sicily. So let's begin our journey by going to the island of Sardinia, or Sardinia is how they pronounce it in English. Sardinia has some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. Has anyone ever been to Sardinia? Just raise your hand if you have. Not seeing it. Oh man, it is paradise, literally. What's particularly unique about the Sardinian beaches is that you won't see any houses or any commercial buildings built on the coastlines. And so the beaches maintain their natural character. Very interesting. That's not the case when you go to also beautiful, the Amalfi Coast, for example. You see all the houses and built into the rocks. Not the case in Sardinia, the total opposite. Look at those crystal clear waters. You'll notice Sardinia has a lot of rock formations, like in this photo and some of the other photos I'm going to show you. We're going to talk more about that in a second because it's connected to wine. Okay, so specifically, we're going to go to the northeastern part of Sardinia. It's an area called Gallura. It's not a town, it's a sort of like a subzone. And it's different from other parts of the island. And what makes it different is that it's full of granite soil. Now, while granite can be found all over the island, it's really only in Gallura where there's an entire wine culture with cultivated vines in these very dense granite soils. And in fact, granite soil has allowed the cultivation of vineyards since ancient times, okay? From the Romans to the Phoenicians and all the way back to the Neurogics. You know, it's kind of funny when I say granite, the first thing we think of is our granite countertops, but this is the real granite, okay? Pure granite. Sardinia is considered one of the oldest lands in the Mediterranean basin, and practically all the geological eras are present in it, going back 300 million years. And in fact, the tectonic plates of the island are not connected to continental Europe, which sort of makes Sardinia unique as well, because it's literally, from a geological standpoint, it's a microcontinent by itself. The most ancient formations of rock are the granite ones that you're actually looking at in this picture. Okay, granite is one of the most abundant resources on the island. So I find it fascinating that wine can be traced all the way back to the beginnings of the Earth's rock formations. So this is what happens to granite after it breaks down over millions of years. It turns into sandy soil, granite subsoil with a sandy top. The coarser the soil is, the better the vine develops, since the root system can deepen easily. Deeper roots typically make better wines. Okay, this is one of the little insider secrets about winemaking. And so sandy soils, which have coarse sand, are more suitable for wine culture. And it gives rise to fragrant, very pleasant wines with always some good alcohol content. Okay, this is a unique terrain in the wine world, and it can't be duplicated. When you combine that with sunny climates and winds from the sea, Gallura is one of the most suitable areas for wine culture throughout Italy. In particular, the cultivation of Vermentino, which is our first wine. So now there's so much more to Sardinia than simply rock formations in the sea, but we'll get into that later when we cover the Sardinian red later, which is also super fascinating. But for now, let's go to the Attaruia vineyards in Sardinia. They're the ones that made the white wine that we sent you, okay? So Attaruia is a small family estate winery. This is the family, the Pitalis family. On the right is the founder and owner, Signor Pietro Pitalis, with his daughter Manuela to my right, and her mother. The daughter, Manuela, operates all the winery's daily activities, including the wine tours. And Pietro, he has an interesting story. He founded the winery in the early 2000s when he decided to take, he had old family land, and it was abandoned. No one in the family was using it. And there were old Cannonau vines growing on him every year. He was not making wine, but what he did was he snipped off the vines and he regrafted them in one of the most fertile terrains in Sardinia. It's called the Valle d'Odoene. And before that, he was a construction contractor. And one of his dreams was to build a 4-star resort in Calagonone, which he did, Calagonone is one of the most sought after vacation destinations. And who knows, maybe one day we'll go there together and plan a trip, because his resort is a short drive to the winery. So it's a really cool place where you can stay and relax. There's also a restaurant, and then you can go and visit the winery. So it's a complete vacation sort of thing. So Attaruia nicknamed this white wine, which is made with Vermentino, Dorvene. Dorvene means veins of gold in Sardinian, local Sardinian language. So they're saying, sort of like in a philosophical and dramatic way, when you drink this wine, you're turning your veins into gold, into value. But they're really referring to the beautifully translucent golden hue of the color of this superior quality Vermentino. Now, the 2020, which we sent you, is the most recent vintage, and it actually ages quite a bit in the cellar for a white wine, since we just got it in. But the wine still has more aging potential to go. So what I would recommend for those of you who ordered the 8-pack and the 12-pack, save a bottle for the summer, because the aromatics in this wine and the body are going to continue to develop in the bottle. So the wine is medium plus bodied. It's lush, has a buttery texture, and that buttery texture really doesn't come from the oak. It comes from hand harvesting quality grapes and being very careful and methodical on the fermentation process. Okay, a lot of those buttery Chardonnays from California that people kind of got hooked on for a while was just over oaking of the wine. And when you over oak a wine, really you're covering up all the nuanced flavors that are found in the grapes. And if we're talking about high quality grapes, that's the last thing you want to do, is cover it up with oak. Okay. So really, when you're drinking an oaky Chardonnay, you're probably drinking something that was covered up for a reason, not just for that buttery texture. Buttery textures can be achieved without oak in the wine cellar. So the wine is fragrant. It's got some exotic citrus fruits. You might notice a little bit of orange peel, some floral notes. And on the finish, there's a little, you actually get this on the nose and the finish, a little hint of sort of saline, the sea salt of the Mediterranean. Okay, it's quite a particular wine. Just 7,000 bottles a year by hand. We're talking about pure wine here, pure wine. Dorvene, Vermentino di Sardegna. And what did I pair this with? This is actually one of my favorite pasta dishes, pasta alla Carlo Fortina. Now, there's actually a even tinier island off the coast of Sardinia called Carloforte. And so this pasta dish is actually named after that little tiny island. And basically it's short pasta, usually le trofie, it's called. And you put tuna in it, cherry tomatoes, and some pesto, okay? And chopped onion, and it's delicious. It's delicious. It's sort of like a magical wine pairing, where structure of this wine, because it's got some structure, it's got some power, balances really nicely with the meatiness of the tuna and the sea-like flavors. Okay, so it really is a great pairing. It's a It's a regional pairing. Okay. Let me just take a look at the chat here. Right. So this wine, someone was asking me, does it age in a steel tank or an oak barrel? It's from steel only. Steel only. No barrel. Okay. So a steel vat is really sort of a neutral place for the wine to develop. So there's no added textures or flavors or aromatics from the wood, because there's no wood contact whatsoever. And yes, it is way better than Pinot Grigio. I would say that. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Couldn't tell you the last time I had a Pinot Grigio. Okay, so let's move on to Sicily now. We're going to hop over to Sicily. This is the largest island in the Mediterranean, and it's one of Italy's 20 regions. And because of this central location, as you can see, you can imagine, easily accessible to travelers by water in the ancient world. And that's why through the centuries, many cultures inhabited the island, including the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Arabs, the Spaniards, the Normans, and so many others. Much more so than Sardinia, I would say. Although Sardinia has a similar story. Today, Sicily is famous for things like its cannoli, eggplant parmesan, and forgive me for saying the Godfather movies. Some people call Sicily a continent as well, and that's because the Sicilian people have everything they need for a quality life. They do import some goods, but they really have everything. They've got the tomatoes, the oranges, the almonds, the pistachios, tomatoes. They've got the meats. They've got the fresh fish from the sea. They pretty much have it all. Okay, and that's in part why so many cultures through the millennia went there. Sicily has Mount Etna as well. It's the most active volcano in the world. It's been erupting for the last 500,000 years. Its continuous eruptive activity, as dangerous as it is for the locals that live near it, it actually contributes to the biodiversity of Sicily. And it's actually good for wine production, not just in the Mount Etna area, but for the whole island. Now, the Sicani people are one of the earliest recorded inhabitants in Sicily, going back to the Neolithic age. And they inhabited the island for thousands of years until eventually they mixed in with the newly arriving cultures and disappeared from existence forever. Fast forward in time, about 2,700 years ago, the Greeks arrived in Sicily. Okay, they built temples and left them. Okay, this is an ancient amphora. It's a container that the Greeks and the Romans used to store both wine and olive oil. It's made with a certain type of clay called terracotta. This particular amphora was found in Sicily, and it's attributed to a Greek style of artwork that they can trace back to Athens. So we know this amphora to be of Greek origin, found in Sicily, and it's 2,600 years old. Now, in the ancient world, the Greeks were the most advanced winemakers of their time. No one knew more about winemaking than the Greeks over 2,000 years ago. When they arrived in Sicily, they noticed that the wines being made by the Sicani people were better than their wines. But they didn't have the winemaking knowledge that the Greeks had. What was the secret? The climate and the soil, as they would learn later, had a massive impact on the quality of the wine, and that certain places produce better grapes for winemaking than others. This would become the dawn of a new age in winemaking, and Sicily was really at the center of this period because its soils and its climate were ideal for cultivating quality wine grapes. In today's world, in the wine world, there's this big argument between, how a good wine is made versus a bad wine. A lot of people give all the credit to the winemaker, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I think what was true 2,000 years ago is still true today, is that the number one impact is the environment. And so when you've got the right soil and the right climate and the right grape varietal, great things can happen with or without a skilled winemaker. Of course, a winemaker could screw it up, of course, but we're talking about the raw materials here. And that's why the Greeks called Italy Enotria, which means land of wine. And Sicily played a huge role in this new discovery for the Greeks. But I just wanted to show you another amphora. This time it's from the Bronze Age, found in Sicily, and this predates the arrival of the Greeks, and proving that winemaking was already happening on the island 3,700 years ago. So now we're on our way to an area in Sicily that I would consider to be off the beaten path. Most people want to go to Mount Etna for wines, but instead we're going to go to the Madonie Mountains, which are located near Palermo. They're the highest mountains in all of Sicily after Mount Etna. The only difference is there's no volcano at the top of this. But what the two areas share in common is what we call mountain viticulture, which is exploiting the high altitudes, the steep slopes, which give rise to great exposures of the sun to the grapes, and also temperature variations between night and day, which is also advantageous to making high quality wine grapes. And right now we're going to a little mountain village called Valle d'Olmo up in the mountains. And just like any other place in Italy, there's always this village, this center village, and then right outside of the village is where the vineyards are. Almost everywhere is like that. Barolo, Barbaresco, doesn't matter where you go. Taurasi, you've got the city center, and then you go right outside to the countryside, and that's where the vineyards are. Truly in the middle of nowhere with this vineyard, there's no sign of civilization. The Castellucimiano vineyards thrive in this natural environment where there's no sign of industry and therefore no pollution. So the first red wine we're going to talk about tonight is Nero d'Avola. So cited by the botanist, the Sicilian botanist named Cuppani, he wrote that in the 17th century, the origins of Nero d'Avola are still uncertain. The name is linked to an ancient wine that was written about many moons ago called Calabrese d'Augusta or Vino Vittoria. So it's a little bit mysterious, all these different names surrounding this wine. Eventually, they simply called this grape and the wine that comes from it Calabrese. But you would think this is a reference to the neighboring region of Calabria to call this grape Calabrese. I mean, if you look at Nero d'Avola right now, you look at the words Nero d'Avola and Calabrese, it's like two completely different things, right? So here's why it has nothing to do with Calabria. So Calabrese is actually Calea Avolisi in ancient Sicilian. Calea Avolisi. And Calea Avolisi means bunches from Avola, referring to grape clusters, from Avola. And so Calea Avolisi eventually evolved into Calabrese. No discussion whatsoever about the region, I'm going to show you a little bit more in a second. So what's Avola? Avola is a little town in southeastern Sicily where the grape is thought to have originated from. Nero d'Avola is the king of Sicilian red wine and has successfully grown in all the wine growing areas of the island where it's found its highest level of expression. So here's sort of the linguistic evolution of the name of this wine, Nero d'Avola. The modern day name Nero d'Avola literally means the black grape from Avola. We went from Calea Avolisi to Calabrese to Nero d'Avola, and that's where the name comes from. So it's a misnomer to think that Nero d'Avola comes from Calabria. It does not. Nero d'Avola, there's a small amount of it that grows in Calabria, but it's not the region's main grape varietal. It's really Sicily's varietal. So the Castellucci Miano vineyards, they produce about 12,000 bottles a year of this Nero d'Avola. Isn't it fascinating? But, we're just not talking about wine here. We're learning about Italian culture, Sicilian culture in this case, the language, the places, and it's all found in a good bottle of wine. So this wine is a very fragrant, aromatic, medium-bodied Nero d'Avola. This is probably the most elegant Nero d'Avola I've ever come across. Most Nero d'Avola, if you've ever bought one in your local wine shop, tends to be a little bit more robust, a bit hot on the palate, a bit peppery. Doesn't have the finesse that this wine has. This has layers of textures. It's almost chewy in a way. It's got a long, elegant, finessed finish, but it doesn't have that robustness that you get from some of the other Nero d'Avola. And the secret is that the mountains have a lot to do with the final result in the bottle. Most of the commercial Nero d'Avola that's coming from Sicily is coming from the western area near Trapani, for example. And the vineyards are closer to sea level, almost exactly at sea level over that way. And so that climate produces more alcoholic, more robust types of wines. Whereas from the Madonie Mountains at high elevation, like this vineyard, for example, is 500 meters above sea level. That's roughly 1,500 feet, very high. So the temperature variations of basically like cool nights and hot days, the grapes actually love that. Just like you and I love to sort of bathe under the sun during the day, and we like to get into our air condition at nighttime, grapes like to do the same thing, and they thrive off of that in the right conditions. It's not just true in Sicily, it's true pretty much all over the place. Okay, what did we pair this with? Very simple. You can't make a mistake. Gnocchi al sugo, right? Did everyone's nonna make gnocchi in the house? Mine did. Loved it. Simple dish. Good tomato sauce with gnocchi made with potatoes. The truth is, with Nero d'Avola is a very versatile wine. Just about anything with red sauce you put in front of it, it's going to mesh very, very well. But it also sort of has enough strength that it can work with meats as well. I mean, you could just as easily pull out a bunch of lamb chops, and this is going to go really well, also. So if you wanted to have sort of a primo e secondo, the Italian style way of having dinner, starting off with a pasta dish and then moving on to a meat dish, Nero d'Avola can pretty much coast your way through the whole dinner without a problem. It marries very well, very easily with, red sauce and meats. Yeah, so someone's saying they thought that Nero d'Avola was native to southwestern Italy, but no, it's really the Sicilians. It's really the Sicilian. And we know that we can't prove it from a genetic standpoint, but I'm sure they will eventually. But we can prove it linguistically, which I just showed you. My other argument with the Greeks getting a lot of credit for bringing varietals to the Italian peninsula, we don't have Nero d'Avola in Greece. It doesn't exist. There's no record of it ever existing in Greece. So I have a hard time sort of believing that story when there's no proof. You know what I mean? Okay, so we're going to stay in Sicily now. We're going to stay at the Castellucci Miano vineyards, and we're going to try our second red wine for the evening. And this is very particular, and it's called Pericone. Now, Pericone is the ancestral grape of Sicily. It's been growing there on the island for over 2,500 years, making it the most ancient grape of Sicily. Its unique, thick skin is reminiscent of a blueberry, as you can see here. It's loaded with antioxidants, which is probably what helped this grape survive for thousands of years in such a rugged microclimate, okay? Historically, this grape was thought to be just a blending grape. They used to call it vino da taglio, cutting wine, because Pericone was always rich in color, rich in alcohol, and would breathe life and add vigor to very weak vintages. They actually exported bulk Pericone wine to France and northern Italy to be used in their blends to make their wines better. There would be no surprise to me if you found a decades-old Barolo or Bordeaux with some Pericone in it. Today, those areas will get into a lot of trouble if they were to blend Pericone with their wines. Big, big trouble. Lawsuits, you know. But historically, before the wine industry got very serious and highly regulated, it was standard practice to purchase grapes and bulk wine from the southern Italian regions, in particular Sicily and also Puglia. It wouldn't be until around 2007 when the Castellucci-Miano winery decided to make the first 100% Pericone wine, which you have in your house today. Before that, before 2007, there was no vineyard in Sicily making 100% monovarietal Pericone wine. It was always blended, usually with Nero d'Avola, very common locally on the island, but also with other varietals. When you asked vintners about Pericone, they never imagined that you could make a high quality wine with it by itself. They always just sold as the blending grape. But this winery has really proved them wrong, because through the years, Castellucci-Miano's Pericone has won awards over and over again. It's quite an interesting wine. This is me with Piero Buffa. He's the director of the winery, and he took me on a tour of the vineyards. And we're actually looking right now at a cluster of Pericone grapes, which kind of look like they're growing on the ground. These are growing on ancient Albarello vines, which can be dated back to Roman times. These are short little bushes that are like 3 feet tall, and they learned that by having this shorter bush, they were producing higher quality grapes from it. And so they don't produce a lot of grapes, but the ones that do, very high quality wine. Okay, so after they do the hand harvest, which pretty obvious by looking at this picture, there's no way a machine could dig this up. You need human hands. Okay, after they do the hand harvest, they put them in these crates and they take them back to the winery. Okay, and then at that point, they're going to undergo a partial drying process called appassimento, which is also credited to the Romans. They were big fans of drying their grapes. They'll rest in these crates for about 40 days in this environment. And during this time, the sugar levels will increase. The flavors in the grapes become more rich, more complex, and they begin developing aromas that will continue to develop throughout the course of winemaking and even in the bottle later. The wine ages in both steel vats afterwards and French oak barrels for about a year before being released to the public. So about 10,000 bottles are produced annually. Now, we sent you the 2019 vintage, and this vintage in particular requires a lot of decanting, 2 to 4 hours. The producer tells me that this vintage has a longer aging potential compared to other vintages. The wine is still very young, it's very fresh, it's got berry notes, floral notes, light spices on the finish. A touch of volcanic earth lingers on the finish as well, but also with fruits. Okay, as the wine decants and opens up, it becomes more fuller bodied, the textures get softer, and more perfumes come out of the wine. Okay, people ask me all the time, what does Pericone taste like? They always want me to compare it to something like, I don't know, Cabernet or Merlot or something like that. And I always answer them that Pericone tastes like Pericone. There's really nothing quite like it. And in fact, it might even take a little bit getting used to because it's so different from just about anything else. But probably the most fascinating thing about this wine and I've been drinking it since 2013, is that from one sip to the next, sometimes it seems like the wine is changing from one sip to the next. So it takes time to get to the end of this wine. And when you do, it might surprise you. I paired this with rustico di sfoglia, puff pastry with zucchini inside. It's sort of almost pureed with prosciutto di Parma and scamorza. Now, there are a gazillion variations that you can do on this recipe. Okay, you could do speck if you want it inside. You could do provolone, whatever you want. And it marries very, very well with that, you know, that sort of that home cooking with pericone wine. Pericone also works really well with pizza. You can't go wrong with pizza with some prosciutto on top. It's fantastic. Don't deprive yourself of pizza and pericone. It's also a very good pairing. Okay, so now we're going to go back to Sardinia for the remainder of the show. Sardinia has been populated since Neolithic times, just like Sicily, with many varying cultures, just like Sicily, except Sardinia is the home of the Nuragic civilization, which existed between 3,000 and 8,000 years ago. We don't really know what happened to them afterwards, but it's assumed that they sort of meshed in with the other cultures that came, because the Romans eventually did conquer. They had a hard time conquering the Sardinian people, but eventually they did. But throughout the island, you'll see these little ruins, which are called nuraghe. There's almost always a central tower, which no one really knows exactly what it was used for. And mysteriously, we don't know what its purpose was, which is sort of interesting. Okay. This is a Nuragic refrigerator, an underground refrigerator to store valuable goods and food. And this was a study done in 2015. A group of scientists from the University of Cagliari went into this Nuragic refrigerator and pulled out a bunch of stuff that they found. One of those things happened to be prehistoric grape seeds. And they did a DNA analysis using a carbon-14 test to determine the age of the seeds and as well as the varietal. And they discovered that this was a wild version of Canonau, which was thought to have been brought by the Spaniards, by the Aragonese people from Spain in the, I believe it was the 1500s or so. But these seeds turned out to be 3,500 years old, proving that Canonau is native to Sardinia. But even more importantly, because these seeds are so old, it's suggesting that Sardinia is the oldest wine culture in the Mediterranean. All right, but we're not going to talk too much about Canonau tonight because I wanted to send you something even more interesting, I think. Okay. Now, the Sardinian people are part of the blue zones. For those of you who ever heard of that, the blue zones are where a large segment of the population lived to be 100 years old. And when they did the study in Sardinia to figure out, you know, how are these people living so long? Of course, there's, you know, the Mediterranean diet, fresh fish, olive oil, etc. But when you ask the local people, you know, what's the secret to life? The first thing they say is drink Canonau. But that's not the wine I sent you this time. We sent you something even more interesting. We're going to go to a ancient village called Usini. It's a small village of about 4,000 people. It's considered a city of wine, which is part of a national association of other participating cities in Italy that have a long history of winemaking, and they want to protect the integrity of the wines as well as the surrounding environment. You can kind of think of it sort of like a UNESCO heritage sites. This is for wine. And that's super important when it comes to Italian wine because, you know, Italian wine is completely attached to the origin from which it comes from. So the next wine that we're going to talk about cannot be anywhere else but in Usini. And in Usini, there are only 9 commercial wineries that cultivate a rare red grape called Cannulari. And Cannulati is written right on the front label of that fourth wine. Just outside of Uzini, you're going to find this very interesting place called Seliga and Tozu. This is a necropolis, a place of burial that prehistoric people cut through the rock and they built tombs inside, okay, for groups of deceased people. This necropolis dates back to the Neolithic age, somewhere around 5,500 years ago. Why am I showing you this? Because inside, scientists found the remnants of twigs that were used to make fire. Probably some type of burial ritual that incorporated that fire. But when the twigs were analyzed, they discovered that the twigs were grape stems, and not just any type of grape stem. They were what's called Vitis vinifera, which is the species of grapevines that all of our wines come from today. It was originally thought that foreign settlers came into Sardinia and they brought grapevines with them, and they brought winemaking to Sardinia. But these twigs predate any settlements, which means that winemaking and the domestication of grapevines was already happening in Sardinia. Fast forward a few thousand years, and you'll see that winemaking in Uzini historically has always been a way of life here. I really wanted to show you this picture because I just thought it was just incredible how important wine is to these people. So much so that the wine cellar was built inside people's homes. The wine cellar was the first room of the house when you go through the entrance. Now notice the curves for this door. It's pretty obvious what's going through that, right? Barrels. But those were carved out later in order to make room to bring the barrel into the house, because barrels really didn't become fashionable until a few hundred years ago. Before that, wine was being aged in clay and cement and concrete, okay? So, like I said, only 9 wineries in this little village that have a very serious, very dedicated wine culture. And I've been traveling there actually for the last 4 or 5 years, and I go to Uzini almost every summer for a quick wine visit. I'm a bit intrigued by this grape varietal. And I've tasted all the wines in this village, and for me, the best winemaker is a small artisan winemaker named Francesco Fiori. He's a native of Uzini, and he spent his entire life cultivating Cannulati vines. In fact, the first time he grafted a vine, he was 13 years old, which is a bit young from what I understand, because it requires a little bit more skilled, a little bit more of an experienced person to do that kind of job. So you can kind of think of him as a little bit of a prodigy in the vineyard. And so he learned the trade not in school, but with mentors and with trial and error. He also happens to be what we would call as a natural winemaker, and his Cannulati wines are made with native yeast and spontaneous fermentation, just like wine was made thousands of years ago. It's just pure, raw wine. So what is this Cannulati grape that the locals are so dedicated to? Here's a picture of it. It's native to Sardinia. In fact, it's one of the most ancient grapes of the island, tracing its history all the way back to the wild vine. Tasting Cannulati is like tasting the ancient past. It also happens to have one of the highest levels of antioxidants of any wine grape in Sardinia and probably the world. Its antioxidant levels were documented in this book called Vitigni di Sardegna, or Vines of Sardinia. And as it turns out, this grape has even more antioxidant levels than Cannonau, which gets all the credit for being this centenarian's wine. But there's something about this that might be influencing the longevity in the Sardinian people as well. Historically, Cannulati has always been used as a blending grape as well, just like Pericone, even Nero d'Avola, because of its dark red pigments and high alcohol and high acidity, make it a great grape to sort of spice up a boring wine. But in Uzini, Cannulati is, like I said, the most coveted grape, and it's produced as a monovarietal. No blending with other grapes in Uzini. Whereas when you go outside of Uzini and Sardinia, Cannulari is blended with other varietals. So you get to taste the essence of a single grape. So I'm going to take you into Francesco's vineyard for a minute. And Francesco's going to squeeze a grape of Cannulari in this video. Now, most red grapes, wine grapes we're talking about, when you press them or squeeze them, white juice extracts from them, okay? Red wines, most red wines get their red color by staying in contact with the skin. The juice has to stay in contact with the skin for a period of time, usually days and weeks, to extract color, okay? The juice, I want to show you here, because it's fascinating, is already red when he squeezes the grape. This is highly unusual, okay?
Posso passare?
Guarda come il cagnolare, vedi?
Sì,
Grappolo pieno pieno.
pieno pieno.
È acino piccolo però molto
Concentrato di sapore.
concentrato, guarda.
Wow.
Guarda.
Fai di nuovo, fai un'altra per me.
E beh, Serena, la musica. Dopo.
Sì, sì,
Vedi il
bravo.
colore che c'è nella buccia subito.
Wow, molto colorato.
Sì.
Mancano i soli.
The harvest. Actually I got to be there.
C'è nella luce che sono,
Sì, c'è sole.
Vero?
A posto. Bravo,
Sopra Maria di Cristo.
fantastico.
Magari qua in
Puoi tagliare un altro?
Magari qua in campagna.
Sì, sì. Sì, sì,
Facciamo tipo il musical in campagna.
sì, sì. Posso assaggiare?
Certo.
Grazie.
Eating the grapes right off the vine. No chemical.
Magari uno di questi. Che sono più...
Ah, più concentrati il grappolo.
È buono.
Buono?
Sì.
So I just wanted to share that with you. You know, we were eating grapes right off the vine, no herbicides, no pesticides, pure, clean wine. Fascinating. You know, the fact that the juice is already red when it comes out also sort of points to the high antioxidant content in the wine. So now I'm going to take you to the vineyard where your wine actually comes from. The vineyard is called Cerejuelas. I just wanted to show you very quickly. It's a single vineyard. These are the oldest vines that Francesco owns. It was his father who planted them. So they're over 50 years old. And they're grown in albarello, the short little vines, 3 feet tall, which is, like I said, a technique that can be traced back to Roman times. And what's amazing and what's valuable about these vines is that 50 years is a long time. And those roots continue to grow deeper and deeper and deeper in search of water. And when it does that, as it goes deeper and deeper, it comes in contact with more minerals. And that's going to impact the complexity of the wine. You know, this wine is very, very complex, very complex. We'll talk about that in a second. So the grapes are hand harvested, as you saw, and then they go back to the winery to be pressed. And Francesco personally presses these grapes himself. Most commercial wineries today do not do that by hand. That's done with machines. He presses it by hand, and I have a feeling that there's a reason why. I didn't get a chance to ask him, but it's all about that handcrafted technique to give a little certain something, a little personalization to the wine. Sort of art meeting science. And then the juice ages for about a year in steel vats. Okay, he doesn't age this wine in oak either. because he wants to show off the high quality and the unique detailed flavors in the wine. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes with oak aging, the finite details get covered up by the flavors in the wood. And that's convenient when the wine isn't good, but when the wine is high quality, you definitely want to show it off. Cedar Uwalis 2019, 6,000 bottles a year. That's it, by hand. So flavor-wise, what does it taste like? Well, it's an intense, powerful wine. You definitely want to decant this at least an hour or two, okay? There's ripe blackberry notes on the front. It's a little bit spicy on the back. There's sort of this earthy minerality on the finish, which is super unique and super savory. As it decants and while it breathes and opens up, it gets more aromatic, more full body, more persistent. The finish is long and super dry, like old world dry. There is no sugar in this wine whatsoever. The wine can age 5 to 7 years. Okay. And like I said, I highly recommend you opening up in advance. Now, I'm not sure why, but one time I opened up a bottle and it took me 3 days to finish. It must have been a busy week for me because I have no problem finishing a bottle of wine in one night. But it took me 3 days to finish this. And I was surprised that on the third day, the wine was just as drinkable, if not even more drinkable on the third day, which is just unheard of when you go to your local wine shop and buy a commercial wine. You know, by the second day, it turns to vinegar. This wine has massive staying power and it's highly resistant to oxygen, clearly. Otherwise, you know, it would have fell apart in a short period of time. So even like 5 or 6 days, I mean, when I go to his winery, and I haven't tested it yet myself from the bottle, but when I go to his winery, I'll buy like a 5-gallon jug of the Cagnolotti wine. And for like a week, there's just no change in the wine whatsoever. I mean, it's incredible. And that points to that high antioxidant content of the wine. So for those of you who like to have, say, 1 glass a night, this is a great option because it doesn't go bad. It'll get you through the week. What did we pair this with? So because of the big power and big body of this wine, pork sausage makes a great pairing. Homemade French fries that we made at home and a side salad just to kind of balance out the healthiness of the dish. Okay. Cedar Uwalis needs fatty meats like pork and hard-aged cheeses to pair with. And you can also, make no mistake, you know, red sauces, especially meat-based red sauces, work really, really well with this wine. Okay. So let's go to our bottle swap option to close out the evening. The grape is called Bovale. Okay. Now, Bovale is a native grape from Sardinia, and it also, like Pericone in Sicily, Bovale seems to be the ancestral grape of Sardinia. It's the most ancient wine grape, possibly in the entire Western Mediterranean. Locally, the Sardinian people call it Moristello, okay, using their local language. In a research study written by Dr. Gianni Lovicu in Sardinia, he discovered that Bovale is directly and genetically related to the wild vine. There are few places in the world today where you can find wild grapevines. Sardinia is one of them. And in fact, Sardinia has one of the largest diffusions of wild grapevines in the world, making it a perfect place to study and understand the relationship between wild vines and domesticated vines, which is where all of our wines come from. So this is a little map of where they have found wild vines all over Sardinia, and they've documented all of it. And this is a picture of prehistoric grape seeds that are over 3,000 years old. Okay, so we know that Bovale and even Cagnolotti are directly genetically related to the wild vines not just because of the carbon 14 test that can trace back the age, but also the shape and size of these prehistoric grape seeds are very similar to the grape seeds in these domesticated vines in Sardinia, like Cagnolari, like Bovale. And in fact, Francesco, when I took you into his vineyard and he was talking about the grapes, he mentioned in Italian, he said, look how small the berry is, but that it's got a lot of juice and it's super concentrated. Those little berries point to the fact that, you know, wild grapes are not as big as the domesticated wine grapes that we have today. So that's how we know that. Okay. So there are also like archaeological sites all over the island where they are still finding wild Bovale seeds. So it's very likely that it was not the Spaniards who brought the grapes. It wasn't the Romans. This grape was most likely domesticated by the Neurogics somewhere between 3,000 and 8,000 years ago. It's fascinating. In fact, we also have records that Sardinia was the epicenter of vine domestication for the Romans once they brought their industry there. It's very interesting. So now I'm going to take you to the Ataruglia vineyards to close this out. And we're going to go into the Muristellu vineyard, Bovale. And this is Pietro Pitalis, the owner that I introduced you to earlier. This is the same producer that made the Vermentino d'Orvene, the white wine that we sent you. And there's a little bit of a story behind this last special wine. Pietro went around the island and he found an old farmer in the center of the island, which is one of the most desolate parts of the island. There's almost no one living there. And he found 100-year-old Bovale vines. And so he purchased them from this old farmer. And he told me recently, he doesn't even know if this farmer is still living. He was already very, very old. And he purchased the vines and he regrafted them here in the Valle d'Odoene, which has been known as being the most fertile soils in Sardinia since Neurogic times. But that's only part of the story that makes this really special. What's even more rare, and I'm going to show you this in this video in a second, the stumps. Each stump in this vineyard only grows one cluster of grapes. That's extremely rare. This is what we call a very low yielding vine. But the quality of the grape that comes from that cluster is through the roof. Okay, and that's why they do it, because for those of you, I don't know if anyone opened this wine this evening, it's a phenomenal work of art. Okay, and one of the key ingredients is this rare, regrafted, 100-year-old vine that only produces one cluster. Okay, let me just show you a little bit.
A fare colore. Quando inizia l'invaiatura, allora dobbiamo togliere un po' d'uva.
Fammi vedere le uve di nuovo. What you're looking at here is each vine only has one cluster of grapes.
Look at all that.
This is very low yield. This is Muristellu, which is the Bovale grape.
You know, that's most commercial industrial vineyards would never do such a thing. Most stumps have half a dozen clusters growing on them to maximize the land and the production. Okay.
They only produce 1,300 bottles of Bovale Muristellu in 100%.
This is the valley of Odoene. I'm going to show you just for a quick little snippet here. It's surrounded by mountains. Look at those rock formations again. So Muristellu, we sent you the 2013, 1,000 333 bottles a year. That's it, by hand. Okay, very small batch. The harvest starts when the sugar concentration and the acidity and the what we call phenolic material is all at the right levels. The harvest is usually carried out either early in the morning or in the evening when the temperature is low, and the fruit is placed in small crates and taken back to the cellar. The processing of the grapes starts during the evening hours of the same day of harvesting, and as soon as they're pressed, the grapes start their fermentation inside small steel containers initially, where the malolactic fermentation occurs spontaneously. After the fermentation, it goes into these French oak barriques. Okay, these are small French oak barrels that can hold 225 liters. Okay, and they will age in these barrels for 3 years. Okay, and then the wine will be bottled and it will rest in the wine cellar for at least a year before they release it. This is actually the most current release of Muristelu that we have, is the 2013. So they age it much longer than just a year in the cellar. So this wine has aging potential of 15 to 20 years. But I personally wouldn't wait. I've been drinking this wine for a couple of years now. And while I would say when the latest version becomes available, I like to decant it 2 to 4 hours. But as the wine ages, I find that decanting is less needed, unless, of course, there's a little bit of sediment, you know. But in terms of opening it up and getting it to breathe and reach its maximum performance, decanting will get you right where you need to be. There's really no reason to wait more. They've already done most of the aging for you in their cellar, which is fantastic. And they're releasing it when they think it's at the beginnings of its drinkability and high performance. Okay. So, like I said, a couple hours of decanting. Pairing wise, oh man, this was a magical dinner. I'm sorry for anyone who's not a meat eater. This was like the most amazing dinner ever. Prime rib with Muristelu. This was a fantastic pairing. Okay, Muristelu has powerful aromatics, explosive aromatics. So that's why you have to decant the wine, because you'll get a little bit of it in the beginning, but after a couple hours, this wine just continues to open up and breathe and open and breathe and open and breathe all the way into the next day. Even the next day, the wine tastes even better than when you first open it. I mean, that's a true sign of quality. You know, garbage wines cannot do that. They're not going to open up over the course of 24 hours and get better. Not going to happen. Okay, that's a little tip from the insider that I just wanted to share with you. Okay, so the wine has these interesting like forest berry flavors, and it sort of kind of takes you back to that wild vine stuff that I was talking about earlier. There's a little bit of a wildness to that berry taste, but at the same time, it's super refined, it's super polished, a little bit spicy on the back, and the tannins are sort of sandy. From a textural standpoint, they have flavors inside of them. They're like fruity and savory. You know, a lot of like really horrible tannic wines just taste like skin is just grabbing your gums and your teeth. These tannins have flavor locked into them, which makes it, you know, it just gives you a different kind of experience. So again, this wine works really well with fatty meats like prime rib. You could go with pork, but I think prime rib or even ribeye works really, really well. Well, ribeye is kind of the same thing. Absolutely magical pairing. So I know there's a couple of questions. I'll get to them in a second, but as we approach the end of the virtual experience, you know, your journey through the islands of Italy is just at the beginnings, if you wish. Both islands are wine worlds of their own, and there's so much more to taste and experience. The sights, the stories, and the legends behind these wines make them, you know, all the more enchanting. Not to mention, you can also lay in the sand at some of the world's most beautiful beaches and just relax. So if you have any questions, you know, going into the future, I'm always available to communicate with you. This is my email, Tony at ItalianWines.nyc. If you ever have a question, or you're having trouble locating these wines, or you want a custom case of wine, you can email me anytime, or you can go to this link above. Okay. I'll also give you another link. Just give me a second. Once I finish up, I'll give you another link. Royal Wine Merchants has my entire portfolio, so you can put together your own mixed case if you wish from their website. So you can either contact them or me, and we're happy to help. Just a quick announcement. At the end of April, I'm doing something that's just going to be legendary. This is a masterclass of Amarone on April 28th. This is a very rare opportunity to experience one of the world's greatest wines, where the wines have already been aging in the winery cellar for an extended period of time, so you can experience what an aged Amarone tastes like. Not to mention that I'll also be revealing some of the fascinating secrets about this grand wine, but we're going to be tasting the 2013, the 2012, and the 2011, all from a single vineyard crew. So for those of you who are, diehard Italian wine enthusiasts, you've got to visit this class at the end of the month. Okay. And with that, I want to thank everyone for attending. Grazie a tutti. I'm going to take a quick look at some questions here. There's some longer questions that popped up on my chat to see what we've got here. Someone's asking me, how can we buy the wine we like? I hope I answered that. If not, I'm going to put that link in 1 second here. I will put that up for you. Just going to take the presentation off, just all see each other. I have to grab the link for everybody. Hey, Andrea, are you there?
I am here.
Were there any questions that I might have missed?
I do see one that just came in. I don't know if you saw this already or answered this. Will you be able to discuss the wines at Basilicata?
Oh, I don't have that on my radar.
Okay.
Yeah, I am very interested in that region as well, but I don't have a course put together yet. So stick around. Eventually, I will get there. I will definitely get there.
Perfect. But I think some of the questions went to you, or you stopped always to answer them during the presentation. Thank you very much for that. But I think you hit everything on our end.
Yeah, that's the link there as well. If you want to go directly to the wine shop's website, you'll see my entire portfolio there, and you can kind of mix and match on your own if you'd like. And they'll also give you a 10% discount on cases. But you can also write to me directly as well, and I can help you. So with that, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Hope it was
Mille grazie, signore.
Ciao.
Ci vediamo.
Valentino, ciao.
Ciao, signore.